Let's get started. It's Saturday, March 21st, 2020, and I'm Trina, Wyatt, founder, CEO of Conscious Good, and I'm here with Mark Allan Kaplan, who is the founder of the Integral Cinema Project, and we are here today to discuss the film A Wrinkle in Time. And thank you, Mark, for allowing us to feature this film because there's so much to talk about, so many good things to delve into. I'm going to turn it over to Mark and get started on our conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Trina. Welcome, everybody, to this new reality we are in. And I want to kind of try to hold what we're doing here in light of where we are right now. And I think this film actually has something to teach us for this moment. I think right now we're all called to be heroes or heroines in our lives in this moment. We are facing a great challenge, which is foundational to both the hero's journey and the heroine's journey. And I want to unpack that a little bit and show how really this film is a beautiful teaching tool, because Ava DuVernay, the filmmaker, is attempting to create a synergy between those two polarities. And I want to talk about the difference between the masculine and the feminine, because the foundational difference between the hero's journey and the heroine's journey is the difference between masculine and feminine. Now I'm saying masculine, feminine, not male and female. Our biological identity of male and female is not the same as masculine and feminine. These are traits we all have. We all have masculine traits and feminine traits. And some of us have more of one or the other. Some women have more masculine than the feminine, and some men have more feminine than the masculine. You know, so that.
This is energy too, right, Mark? Not just traits,
energy.
But the energy.
There's an energy, but there's this really beautiful foundational kind of research that was done by Carol Gilligan, who looked at the male-dominated research on the moral line of development that we all have. And she really kind of tried to unpack that to see if there's a difference between what men and women, or masculine and feminine, how we evolve through our moral stages. And she found there was a big difference. And that difference was the difference between agency and communion. The masculine tends to look at a challenge, a moral question, or like, what do I do here? You know, something is happening and I have to make a choice. And what is my kind of, morals are kind of like our foundation for how we process that choice in some ways. And the masculine response is usually, how can I fix this? What can I do about it? And the feminine response is more, what's going on here on a relationship level? What are the feelings? What is happening here between us? And how can I care for everyone going through what's happening here? And as I'm saying that, I'm hoping you can see how we need both of those right now. We need to synergize those. And usually in cinema, in media, you have tend to be one or the other. Sometimes there's a mix, but it's not really integrated and synergized. So we have action-oriented films, which are agency films. So guy films, right? Guy films are really action-driven, right? A, B, C, D. Okay, you know, that's the goal. Got to, you know, we got to find the holy grail. Whereas the feminine response is more, what is the opening here? What is the lesson here? How is this going to help me and others grow? What is, you know, all of those things, and how do I care for myself and others and all that, you know, so it's like this, you know. So, and feminine oriented films or chick flicks are relationship oriented or driven. So that's why people with very strong masculine are not into those, because they're searching for the agency, right? And how some women who are high feminine may not be connected that much to that pure agency driven films. But over the last 10 years, we have seen a lot of explorations of trying to find this balance, this kind of mix between action and relationship. So we're starting to see a lot more action films that have relationship, you know, like stronger characters happening and more of that. And we're starting to see more communion or feminine works or relationship works having some explorations of that. But what is happening here in Wrinkle in Time, I think, is a grand experiment. Like I haven't seen this done yet at this level, what she's doing here. And that is she's actually taking the hero's journey structure, the beginning, middle, and end, you know, like usually in an agency-oriented film, every scene has that trajectory as well. And then the relationships, even if they're three-dimensional or four-dimensional, they're kind of just part of that flow. What she's doing is she's actually interrupting the flow. We'll be in a scene that's heading somewhere, and the characters will stop it for a moment of communion. And there's this really great scene where it's this beautiful archetypal moment for what she's doing, where they are walking into the space, seeking the wisdom of the magician. They're on the path. And they're about to go, they're going to go seek, and in that moment, here we go, I see it, we stop, we come back to a connection, to what's going on inside, to what the inner communion challenge is. And that moment is, I think, beautifully, beautifully done. And we're actually seeing the rest of them continue on the path. And we see our main heroine
Meg, right?
Meg. And the character that's Oprah's playing, I'm forgetting her name.
Ms.
Uh,
Who?
I can't remember right now.
Okay.
But she's holding her hands, you see, and she's looking at her face to face, you know, and it's like this really kind of, you feel an archetypal and a visual kind of separation between the hero's journey and the heroine's journey. So it's an actual visceral representation of what she's doing here.
Beautiful. Beautiful. This is so great. One of the reasons, besides on our last call, Mark, that I said let's choose a film that attempts to weave the heroine's journey with the heroine's journey, you know, in a cinematic experience. And everyone that I've talked to about this film has agreed that it's flawed. And you and I had a conversation, and I said, look, we're a group of storytellers. And for me, how we get better at our craft, yes, we can look at perfect, you know, Oscar-winning films, but really when we can identify what works in a film and what doesn't work, to me, that's where we can grow as storytellers. So I would love, because I can list everything that didn't work for me in this film. So I love hearing from you what's really working. Where is Ava and the filmmakers behind this? Where are they really pushing that envelope, like in that scene, that we can learn from?
Beautiful. Okay. Well, this is a really important question here, because one of the things I learned from one of my mentors, Robert Weiss, who was the editor of Citizen Kane and director of Sound of Music, West Side Story, all those. Amazing man. A cinema bodhisattva, actually, a beautiful man. He told me that when there's a problem with a scene, it's usually never in that scene. It's often in the setup before, the scene before, something about the setup to that scene, or it's something that follows that there's a, so usually when we experience something off, we're a little bit off in terms of, and one of the things that I think is interesting about this work is that there's a lot of little flaws, like in a lot of works. And remember, she is attempting something here that has never been done before. So she's in uncharted territory. So a lot of filmmakers exploring uncharted territory will make a lot of mistakes. And in a way, this film has one major flaw that I really believe if that wasn't there, a lot of those other flaws would not be there after we finished watching the film. And that, but this was a key flaw. And this is a great lesson here. The climax of the film was a major flaw. At that moment, it was like she dropped the ball and dissipated the energy. Now, what she attempted, I believe, what she was attempting is to make that climax a communion climax. But the momentum of the agency, she didn't hit the balance. And because of that, it's like it just, the whole film unraveled. See, if you miss the climax, you could have a great work, but there's three moments in any film that if you do great, you're halfway there. The beginning, the middle, no, I'm sorry, the beginning, the end, and the climax. Now, what she was attempting with the climax is actually a heroic, heroinistic act. She was trying to, kind of synergize the climax, because the climax comes from that agency form of storytelling. But she didn't hit it. And if you don't hit the climax, man.
Now, Mark, so I don't remember the book at all. So some of these things I go, is it in the writing? I mean, is part of the flawed nature of this film in that the story itself didn't construct the climax properly, or are we saying no, this is the director from a cinematic, momentum and the energy leading up to the climax? Because one of the things that I realized in rewatching it that I thought was flawed is that it was a little dumbed down for, I think, today's audience. I mean, I was listening to the dialogue and kind of some of the pacing, and I went, oh yeah, this is for like, a 12-year-old or a 10-year-old. And I was like, a lot of, family films these days are super smart, and it's like this. And is that because they're mostly agency? Or, can you talk a little bit about that, and before we open it up to everyone's?
Yeah. Again, I mean, the whole thing, she was trying that synergy, and that scene that we were just talking about, she hit it. Some of the other things you're talking about, I mean, for example, that besides the masculine and feminine, or the agency and community synergy she was seeking, there's also an attempt trying to synergize agency and communion in every scene is hard. And she's also trying to synergize the ability for it to connect with children and adults. Star Wars has that struggle too, because Lucas attempted to create a mythology for all ages. And sometimes he hit it, sometimes he didn't. Like the first film, the Phantom Menace, the first prequel, was way too much for kids. So like one of the characters was like, for adults, it was just like, oh man, So finding that synergy between adult and kid, so you have to synergize the stages of development as well. And so when you're doing a work that is rooted in kids, but you want it for adults, you see, so what Lucas was trying to do, and I think what Wrinkle in Time was trying to do, was to create a mythic archetypal journey that could feed us through all of our stages of development. That's not an easy thing. So yes, some of the kids' works are a lot more agency, but also just the dialogue, for example. I don't think she got that mix right. But again, I mean, for me as a filmmaker, I kind of look at it and I'm just in awe of what she was trying to do, and just trying to learn from where she dropped the ball, or she didn't hit the mark. That's better at it. She didn't hit the mark, because she was trying to hit a target that nobody has really hit consistently yet.
Yes, that's right. Which is, I applaud that. So, I mean, again, the reason that we chose this film for this month's discussion. Now, when you say the climax didn't work, I mean, one of the big problems I had with the film is you know, Meg is there. They're in the tunnel. You know, it's the father, and he's like, I only have enough energy to, I want to say vacerate, but that's not it. I know Jonathan will know the Tesser. And she says, I'm not leaving my brother. And she lets go of her father and she goes after her brother. She ends up, you know, achieving the release of her brother, and they go home. And it's like the dad never made that choice.
Now, there you go. That's it.
That's what
it.
climax was.
That's the hole. You hit the hole.
Yeah. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that we all knew what we were talking about when the climax didn't work.
Well,
that is the hole.
Yeah, we should talk about that. We should talk about that
Go
whole.
ahead, Jonathan.
We should unpack that whole a little bit more for other people watching. I mean, yeah, the fact is also that the father gets back somehow, and yet is somehow there in the yard when they get back. So there's that time is kind of not clear how the father got back. And she does kind of look at her father like, I have a new understanding that he's not perfect. But as you say, it isn't really, it's dropped. That is a hole. And that was a huge hole because the entire mission of the film, the agency part of it, was her rescuing her father. So having that hole in that moment was really intense. But I was going to say, in defense of the film, and I'd be interested in some of the other critiques you had, Trina, because to me, this film is just flooded in love. And that's one of the things that I think.
Oh my God, yes. No, and that's why I thank you, Jonathan, for saying that. Because that to me is the big failure of the film, is that you sit there and you go, wow, that the daughter and the son know that the father left or was willing to leave without the son. And yet now they're all going to be living in harmony, you know, back at home, which is really beautiful. But it was like that hole is like we've ignored that hole, or that he, you know, he had that fear. He gave into his fear, and she didn't. She went with love.
Right.
And
well, he didn't have the bond with the baby because it was a baby when he left.
Charles
Wallace, I think. So I suspect it was a new baby that came into the family.
Something I really wanted somebody who had read the book, because that's where I go. This is based on a book, and we have to give some of the narrative, some of the storyline. You know, is this because they were trying to stay too true to the book? They didn't fix some of the problems that were in the book.
That's a great point, and I'll tell you something here. All right.
Yeah. The way it doesn't matter.
David Lean, the director of Lawrence of Arabia, and I forget what else. Major. Anyways,
Zhivago.
He's considered one of the great adapters of literature into film. And he spoke at the AFI when I was there, and he taught us a master class. And one of the things he said, I think, was so profound. He said, the secret to adapting a great work of literature to the film is that you have to find the truth of that work and let go of the rest.
Amen.
You can't be, because it's a different medium, but you have to find the heart of it. If you could find the heart of what is the author is trying to say, and there's a great example of this. I don't know if anyone has seen The World According to Garp.
Yes.
The film. This is one of the few adaptations where the author has publicly said there's a scene in that film that was not in the book that he wished he had written.
I think a great example is The English Patient, because to me that was a beautiful novel on its own, and I said, how are they going to adapt this? And the film was something quite different. It was not a true adaptation. So that's going to be my homework. I'm going to reread the ending of A Wrinkle in Time between now and our next movie of the month, and I'm going to weigh in on my opinion. But Jonathan, let's go back to the love and the beauty that was in this film, please.
Yes.
Let's
So,
talk more
so I
about that
mean,
and then open it up.
well, that's the reason that to me the flaw does not torpedo the film, because I'm so in love with the film throughout, but also just the way the opening scene unfolds with her and her father, and this just pure communion between father and daughter and love. And he even talks about the unfoldment of love, that love doesn't go away, it just gets unfolded. So in a way he loses his own lesson at the end, which is another thing that's just dropped. But then also the scene with her and her brother, if you just compare that to a typical Hollywood film, the way, say, Spielberg handles that, and the lazy screenwriter way, is just to write conflict. Brothers and sisters are sniping at each other all the time. And that's why when you're saying that you like these, a lot of kids' films are also aimed at adults, a lot of times it's because they're doing a lot of the kind of snarky, wiseacre, postmodern humor that lazy screenwriters like to do in lieu of actually building relationships. And so I love that she's so committed to everything is about a relationship, and every scene brings characters closer together. Every obstacle they come up with actually makes them more together in this, until the end when the kid gets taken over by its and actually loses that. But other than that, scenes don't drive characters apart, they actually bring them more together. And that's kind of a consistent theme throughout the entire film. So it's a very unusual piece of agents, a piece of communion, but in the service of this agency mission, you know. And I thought it was just really lovely the way they unfold her kind of budding romance and sexuality kind of with the kid, you know. I like your hair. Don't say that. This is kind of this weird, unusual.
But I absolutely, I want to just echo again that what a promising start, beautiful start to a film. Those first few scenes, really, really special. So
Yeah.
it's 30
Wait, I
minutes
want to
in.
come right off
Go
of that
on,
for one
Mark.
second. That opening scene is an example of communion um, camera work. It's just this floating kind of, and it's like you're in this almost like love field, like the camera is capturing this kind of field of love between them. And it's a great, I mean, this is like, I think that's a classic scene, you know, in cinema now. I believe that, you know, this is gonna, I mean, so that's, we haven't actually seen, see, one of the things that I think is groundbreaking about what she's doing is she is integrating it into story structure and into cinematic expression. So she's not just doing a communion film about relationships. She's exploring how a camera can be a communion field, how, you know, how we can do it visually, how we can, you know, so how we can do it in the actual story structure. So she's going deep, and she is I mean, she's exploring, and she's in the lead of a movement in the African-American cinema that I believe is based on this communion effort. Jonathan and I, you know, have been researching this for a while, and he's been integral in this research, really finding how this new generation of African-American filmmakers are approaching the cinema and even heavy issues like racism and white supremacy and all that from love. They're not vilifying anyone. They're creating, they're concentrating on the bigger picture, on the field, and they're looking at the relationships, and but no one is evil. You know, there's no black and white, right or wrong, you know, and they're creating this love field, this communion field, and she's at the forefront.
So beautiful. I would love to open it up for other people's. Michael, Lisa, I'm not sure who's on the iPhone, but did you want to talk about what you loved about the film, what worked for you, what didn't work?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I love the film, and I'm so pleased that I got the ending right, because I was thinking, you said in the little piece on it, you said, you know, the ending's flawed. And I thought it must be something deep, and I'm not getting it. And that part annoyed the hell out of me. And I thought, that can't be it. It's got to be some esoterical thing. I was just so pleased I got the thing right. Yeah. So I thought it was a beautiful film, and it's the first film I've watched in VR, and it was really good.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Yeah, it was very
Oh, that's
immersive.
wonderful.
Yeah.
So this is Trina's sister.
Oh, hey there.
Hi. And two things. One is this is my first time participating in one of these conversations. I'm enjoying much. The other is a couple things. Wrinkle in Time was my favorite book in 6th grade, read it several times. And so I'm familiar with it from that experience. Thank you, Mark, both Marks, for your comments. I will be able to appreciate the film in a whole new way. I've only seen it once, but your comments, have opened my eyes a little bit to some of the challenges they were facing. A couple of things came to mind while I was listening. I think the advantage that the book has is that it is narrated from the subjective perspective of a young girl. So there wasn't a challenge of trying to express some of those inclusive concepts from an objective camera point of view. When you're in the girl's mind in the book, you're able to experience her inclusive and loving and perspective from inside her own mind. Much easier to express than through cinema, I think. The other thing I noticed from your comments was, okay, so the challenge, Mark, you were using the term communal. And as I was hearing how you were using that word, what occurred to me was that my experience of the feminine and the heroine's journey is that it is contextual, meaning it is more than just relational and communal. It is the context within which we are inclusive of each other. And how do you express that expanded context in a film? It's more than just relational. It is the context of inclusion and acceptance that really is a challenge to express visually and in dialogue, because the assumption is very nonverbal. How do I say that? That the assumption is that we are all included and loved. How do you express that in a visual medium? Okay, the only movie I could think of while I was listening to you that really made a good stab at it, and again, it was focused, on the Black community, was the Spider-Verse. And they were able to do it because they expanded the context into multiple universes. And then they were able to create a sense of context, and I think it's easier to accomplish in animation, because our imaginations get to expand along with the visual world that they just manipulate, and we get to go there with them. Anyway, those are the two thoughts that I had.
Absolutely. Oh, wow. Beautiful. Absolutely. Yes, the Spider-Verse. Yes. That came after Wrinkle in Time. It was part of this movement. It's part of, the whole thing. And they did it, man.
It got us there, didn't it?
Yeah, they took it further. They went there. Yeah. And it was a communion team. It was 4 directors.
I felt the communal or the context that one step back assumption of that larger context. I could feel it in that one, where I didn't feel it in A Wrinkle in Time, but I could feel it in that one. They took it all the way back to that huge context. Anyway.
Yeah, I think one of the directors is a storyboard artist for Ava DuVernay as well.
Yes.
In fact, maybe for
okay.
Time. So I was going to say, in the context of when you talk about context, I think we shouldn't get past the fact that this film is, of course, a rainbow of colors as well, Black and Asian and all these different colors, and just the fact that it's such an iconic American novel and that it was given to a Black woman to direct is easy for us to overlook as white people, but Black people definitely are aware that they don't tend to get the opportunity to take on revered properties like that. So that also is,
I did.
there's an undercurrent to that as well. That is
Yeah.
maybe more
And
invisible
you know
to
what? One of
us.
the things is, what we're talking here is not communal, but communion. There's a subtle difference there, and I believe communion it also includes context. When we're talking, and context is relational, because context is, it's like the idea of communion, you're right, is not just about relationships, but it is also about the relationship between what's happening here and what's happening outside of it. So communion is about more than just relationships between people.
Yes, I get it.
So
Yeah.
it's relationship between everything.
Oh, yeah, I like that. Got it.
Okay,
It's
so
relational kind of construct field, like you're relating, you're trying to connect everything, seeing
So-
how things affect each other.
Meaning the social
Thank
and
you, Mark.
cultural field.
So Arden, can you tell us the ending? Is the book ending what is flawed and they didn't fix it in the film? Do you
I'll have to-
remember?
I'll have to reach back into my memory about how they, here's what I've only seen the movie once. And so I might be sketchy about the details about those transitions, because I'm not as fluent in movie as my sister Trina. But what I did notice, because of course I had an expectation when I watched the movie, because I was in love with the book in 6th grade when it came out, right? And what I noticed was there was more emphasis. How do I say this? I didn't find any incongruence in how the climax, the experience of the climax in the book and how it resolved through the end of the book. I remember it made all the sense in the world to me, what she experienced in that moment and how the book resolved. I don't remember there being any gap, but I did notice the gap in the movie. I'm going, that isn't how I remember that playing out. I mean, how it felt. Again, I don't remember the details of scene by scene, but I remember watching the movie and going, did she do it differently for a reason? Was there some other motive behind how she made the decisions to resolve from the moment of climax to the end of the movie? And I remember thinking, that doesn't feel familiar to me. There might have been some other agenda or reason for how she did that. Now, the detail of that, I can't remember. I just remember how it felt.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
One quick point here I wanted to make, also from what you were talking about, in that one of the key differences between literature and film, and I think you pointed this out, is that in a book, you could really kind of explore subjective experience. You know, like you said, in the book, it's from her point of view, and we understand, we're inside of her mind. It's easy to get inside of the mind of a character in a book.
Mm-hmm.
It's harder in a film because you can't, you know, I mean, in some films you could maybe voice over or whatever, but
Yeah,
but to make it a
voiceover.
visceral experience like you do with the book, it's different. You have to, so it is a challenge. And that's why trying to take a great piece of literature directly to film won't work.
Yeah. I applaud her for attempting, particularly that particular book.
Yeah.
It's so iconic. So, and I'm glad she had the opportunity. I'm glad it was her that had the opportunity.
Yep.
And bravo for trying. It didn't hit the mark for me. And again, I had a love affair with the book, so it's not fair.
Okay, we have Betsy and Lisa. Do either of you want to chime in with your thoughts?
Hi, sorry, I'm also making lunch simultaneously. The only thing that I thought of, I mean, the only thing that came up, and I even remember there being discussions about this at the time, even about the ending, was that, you know, Wrinkle in Time did have a large religious component to it that they sort of, I think, took away, if I'm not mistaken. And that might have been part of why the ending for me. I didn't like the movie at all, either to my kids for some reason, and we all loved the book, but we could never put our finger on why. And then I read later that might have been, some people had an issue with that. I don't know that anybody remembers that but me, but that was one thing.
But I've never read the book, so.
And this is Lisa. And I have to agree with Betsy actually on that. I watched the film. I really didn't care for it, honestly. So I just was hoping to kind of tune in and see what I might have missed. And I might go through it again and with some of these ideas and comments in mind and take another shot at it. But I really, really didn't care for it. So I appreciate all the comments and the different perspectives, and thank you.
Well, thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
I was saying, when I told Betsy that we were going to do Wrinkle in Time, she goes, I didn't like that film. And I said, I know. I said, I personally am more interested in discussing films where there is this polarity of opinion, instead of us getting on and going, oh yeah, I love this. Oh, that was perfect. Oh, that was great. You know, let's really get in there and, you know, hash it out.
And you know, as media makers, anyways, I think we learn a lot from a grand experiment that doesn't quite hit it. You know. So,
well, my question is this, and I don't mean to make anybody mad, but I've been thinking about this a lot lately. It's my nature to say something that'll piss someone off. It's my job.
Let's see.
I was having this conversation with my daughter recently. You know, a friend of mine is writing a book on gender identity and all this stuff. And I asked her, I said, well, what do you know, when you go watch a movie or when you're thinking about it, do you think like, oh, this was made by a woman, or oh, this was made by a man, or oh, this was made by an African-American? And she's just like, no, I really don't. And I, for the life of me, even though the story, of course, is, you know, the heroine's journey, it's her journey, I don't understand why, and maybe you talked about this, like what is it about? Why do we have to define? I know that it's partly because there's a disparity in women filmmakers, but does that really play a big role in how we experience a film?
yes.
It does.
The idea of,
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I basically started on this path with the.
but is it?
Yeah, I learned this from a.
But is it because you're paying attention? Is it because
I mean, it's like
you think about it?
Well, you know, it's like when we watch a film. If you haven't studied film, or you're not a filmmaker or a film scholar or anything like that, you just experience it as a film. I mean, you know,
right.
It shouldn't be that you should be thinking about that stuff. It's filmmakers who are like trying to figure out, you know, how to do this stuff behind, you know, like if you're an audience member thinking about this, then the film is not going to be that good because it's, you know, it should be unconscious. But like I first started thinking about this when I was at the AFI, and Lynn Littman, a great woman director, she wasn't given a lot of shots, but she did some great stuff. And she was part of the early struggles, you know, with women in Hollywood. And she made a film called Testament. And she was the one who was talking to us about the difference between masculine and feminine filmmaking and filmic expression. And she was basically saying that there are differences in how men and women, or let's say masculine and feminine, perceive, communicate, and all that. And she tried to teach us about it. so she, you know, I mean, so she talked about, she didn't use the terms agency and communion, but that's essentially what she was talking about, is that the feminine is more communion oriented or relationship oriented, context oriented. And the masculine is more action oriented, more agency oriented. And the best films, the most popular films, are a synergy of those. And usually it's using the agency as the kind of core trajectory. And then with the relational and contextual as the meat of it. But what she's trying to do is to kind of find something that is beyond that, something that is a pure synergy of both, that doesn't have those two separate things. That having both an agency and communion, infrastructure and meat.
Yes.
And that's a tough thing to crack.
And I think also, I mean, it's a little bit, there's so much in life that unless somebody points it out to you and says, this is what you're experiencing and why, that you can start identifying it and saying, well, what are my other choices? So for example, you know, we've had this whole film industry has been very masculine since inception. And now the idea of a heroine's journey is something, you know, 50 years ago, nobody would have cared about. Now people are like, oh, really? There's a different experience. There's a different way of looking at the world. There's a different way of interacting with the world. There's a different way of solving a problem or getting something done or not getting something, you know, all of these things are in flux. Now we're realizing there isn't one way of telling a story or one way of looking at the world. There is this masculine and feminine, and sometimes it'll be, you know, way feminine and sometimes it'll be way masculine. But when we can, like in life, bring these two energies and have balance and synergy, this is where I think the real magic and beauty is possible.
Yeah. And I think that's the calling of this moment for us is all. It's like, one of the things I'm kind of holding a lot these days, whoops, I'm losing focus, is the idea that when we're on a plane and there's turbulence and the oxygen masks fall down, first thing we should do is to put the mask on and then help others. And in a way, that's kind of like the choices we have to make as we're entering this liminal phase in our civilization, as the systems theorists and anthropologists call it, which is every structure and foundation is in flux. So I mean, right now, in any moment, we don't know what's going to happen. And we have a lot of challenges coming in every direction. I mean, physical, emotional, mental, cultural, social. And we have to make fast choices. We have to protect ourselves. We have to help others, protect others. And so we're kind of, this is the calling for me of this moment, is that kind of being able to hold both, man. We gotta, you know, it's like, how do we kind of not get lost in either one? It's like, you know, it's like when we're going through the day, it's very easy to get lost in our tasks and forget being fully present to the moment and to each other, you know. And And so we have to kind of find this synergy that the filmmakers have been seeking in a way too.
Between being and doing and
being
all
and
of that.
doing simultaneously.
Yeah, I love that. Well, since my wonderful sister Arden has joined us, we had I hope you don't mind me sharing, Arden, we had a beautiful call together yesterday talking about our family and our family dynamics. And there are several of our, myself included, sisters who have had a very strong masculine energy. And, you know, I was laughing when you said, you know, the masculine ways to solve the problem. I'm very comfortable when somebody comes to me and says, can you solve this problem, you know? And if I have to, you know, be empathetic and maternal and, you know, I jokingly said to people, don't come to me if your dog died. I'm not that friend. Come to me when you need a problem solved. And so to me, that was one of the things I learned in reading The Heroine's Journey, is that I need to nurture the feminine within me, you know, and my wonderful sister Arden, she's very feminine. So she's a wonderful feminine role model for me. So it's great to have this conversation today of all days.
Beautiful.
I can unmute you, Arden. I don't know if she's still with us, but
I'm all about context. All about context, and because of that, you know, just that's my nature to be. I'm extremely right-brained, so I experience things like movies from that perspective, and that's kind of what I had in mind as you were answering the woman's question. Why does it matter who, you know? Does it matter that it's a woman being the director or a Black woman? Yes, because we are getting exposed to their perception of the world, and that matters, that we have a variety of perceptions that we are exposed to help broaden out our experience, you know. But my perception just tends to be extremely right-brained, very contextual, very image and metaphor driven. And so I know when a filmmaker has hit that, and she was really trying, but didn't quite hit the mark. And also, I wanted to say something just about love. You know when there's love in a movie. If the people that are producing it do it with all their heart, you feel it as you're sitting there watching it. That energy that my sister Trina referred to early on in this discussion, it's palpable. Don't discount that at all. You can do everything technically correct, and if there's no love in it, that audience knows at some level. And so bravo for those who throw their whole heart into it, because for those of us at the receiving end of it, it blesses our lives. It does.
Beautiful.
That is a very, very, very important point here. Actually, I've been doing this research for years on this very thing. I've been running tests on the consciousness of filmmakers and how that affects the work. Does it resonate through the work? And all the data suggests that it does. It does. So there's data. We got data on it. It does. Yeah, I even was working on this at a think tank by one of the founders of Microsoft, and we were exploring this. So it does.
Oh, good. Good to know I'm right.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah. And a master puts their whole being into what they're doing. And that's one of the factors that makes them a master of a craft, of an art.
Like a Meryl Streep, right?
When they put their whole being into it, you feel it. When you see a great work of art, the Michelangelo's David or Rembrandt's Night Watch, you could almost feel their presence. It's almost like, you know, when you're watching a Kubrick film. I could see like 30 seconds of a Kubrick film. It's Kubrick. I know it's Kubrick. You mean he's in the room with me.
DuVernay has that too, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, really enjoyed the conversation with you guys. Thank you. Very timely for me. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us. And I wanted to say I looked up some interesting facts about Ava DuVernay, and her background, she's a journalist. She didn't pick up a camera until she was 32. And I just, you know, I'm a huge fan now, not just because of the films itself, but just what she's done in her life to sort of overcome challenges and maybe limitations. And with all of that said, be able to create a work of art infused with so much love. So
she's actually created her own studio now. She's producing all kinds of TV shows and movies from other filmmakers as well. She's created an entire sort of space for performers and creators.
She's midwifing a whole movement, basically.
What's that movement called?
Well, we're calling it the new African American cinema, but I don't know. We don't have an official title for it yet.
But actually, there's now a documentary on Netflix, if you're interested, which is quite good, called it's based on She's Gotta Have It, but it's called They've Gotta Have It, I think, which is about this new movement of African American filmmakers. Yeah, which was produced by Ava. They
beautiful.
They interview, even going back to Spike Lee as sort of the first breakout character, but there's this whole new generation now with Barry Jenkins, who did Moonlight and Beale Street, and Jordan Peele, of course, for Get Out. Different type of film.
Michael, I have to ask you this. What is on your t-shirt? Who is that on your t-shirt that you're wearing?
It's Kamala Harris.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Kamala Harris. That's awesome. Yeah. Fabulous. Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. And
thank
you, Mark, Jonathan, if you want to wrap up.
Jonathan, you have anything you want to say before we go?
Well, just thank you everyone for showing up to this event. So if you watch Wrinkle in Time again, you can look at it from that communion lens and just see how every scene reinforces the love between the characters. And even just the way Charles Wallace is just this flood of love. He gives everyone hugs. He hugs the boy, who's the suitor to the girl, who's kind of surprised. So he's kind of opening people's heart fields, and that's why all the magical women love him so much, because he's sort of a special character as well.
Yeah, and I just want to say to everybody that in this moment in our world, in our lives, that we are entering what they call what is the chrysalis phase. The caterpillar body is turning to liquid, our civilization wise, and something is going to be born, and it's all on us to do the work. And so stay strong, stay well, help each other, and keep evolving, and we'll get through this together.
Thank you.
Thank you. Namaste, everyone.